A solemn moment now when the coffin of Tito Mboweni is brought into the stadium. With us is the better minds of Sophie Mokoena and Mzondile Mbeche, SABC international editor and political editor. The gravity of the moment, as you know, this is a special official funeral, Category 2, which means what you're seeing on your screen now is police ceremonial elements. Let's listen in before we bring in our guest.
The Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, now handing over the flag of Tito, the flag of the ANC to National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe, who are showing you the visuals of Gwede Mantashe, the National Chair, handing over the flag of the African National Congress to the family of Tito Mboweni. I'm just going to try and get closer to hear what Mr. Mantashe is saying. That was the National Chair of the ANC handing over the flag of the African National Congress to the family of Tito Mboweni. The ANC will now move out as the government now takes over, where the remains of Tito Titus Mboweni will now be draped in the South African flag and will ultimately be taken into the official Category 2 funeral service by President Cyril Ramaphosa. We have just seen him as well. He has just landed in an SANDF chopper here at the Nkowankowa Stadium for the official funeral Category 2 of Tito Titus Mboweni, a revered struggle icon who was a very close friend of Maria Ramos, the former, who spoke so eloquently about Tito Mboweni earlier in the week as well. As you can see, the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, alongside Musanda, the Provincial Secretary of the ANC in Limpopo, and also Puleshai, the Regional Chairperson of Nomen Mashabane region, and also Matibe, who is the Regional Chairperson of Vembe region in Limpopo. They ultimately will also be part of the funeral service of this gallant struggle icon, who was one of the pioneers of South Africa's labor laws within the country. For this particular memorial service, President Cyril Ramaphosa will ultimately also deliver the eulogy. Looking at the lives and times of Tito Mboweni, he was one of those who spoke very openly that the African Bank should be converted into a state bank in order to break the monopoly of the big banks within the country. He also spoke about a state mining company. You'd remember how Mbazima Mashilowa, the former COSATU's General Secretary, also spoke about Tito Mboweni's role in the formation of South Africa's laws in the country, particularly labor laws in the country. Then you go to Tito Mboweni's tenure at the South African Reserve Bank as the governor. You look at how in one meeting of the Reserve Bank with the shareholders, he was ultimately sued for alleged racist comments and defamation, and he won that particular case in court. And that just tells you how the man who many have spoken about to be very outspoken, to be eloquent, and who was a disciplinarian, and who was focused, and who was ethical. One of the very few leaders post-apartheid in a democratic dispensation in South Africa who have not been accused of any wrongdoing, of any corruption. He represented the people with dignity. He also represented the people of his area, Tzaneen, Kloof, Mopane, diligently as well. And he also spoke about how the youth needs to be given an opportunity within the ranks of government and within the ranks of the African National Congress. What comes to mind is how Tito Mboweni Blaine, when he was called upon to be the Minister of Finance, he was very reluctant in taking up that particular post and told President Mbeki that you can't keep recycling old faces into government positions. Rather give the youth an opportunity to also lead. Blaine, I am just looking out for Maria Ramos, who also worked with Tito Mboweni and was a friend of Tito Mboweni after they came back from exile. I saw her with her husband earlier on, Trevor Manuel. I can't seem to locate them at this point in time, Blaine. But as the conversations continue, we will also definitely engage with her. Oh, I can see her at this point in time. I am just going to try her. Former Minister Trevor Manuel, how are you, sir?
Very well.
I'm good, thanks. Just your memories of the late Minister Tito Mboweni.
If you want memories, it'll take a very long time. Tito was a very special human being. There was all the quirkiness of Tito. He was funny in that kind of way, but beneath that was a very deep intellect that thought intensively about the issues that confront South Africa and always was focused on what we can do to ensure that we improve on the quality of life of people in a measurable way. As an economist, measurement was important to Tito, and this was what he did. Whether as Minister of Labour, as Governor of the Reserve Bank, but more importantly, just as an intellectual and as an economist, it was the focus of his entire adult life. But he was also warm and funny, and that's what made him such a special human being.
What are some of your hardest moments working with him as the Minister of Finance?
The
hardest moments working with him, particularly some of the fiscal monetary policies that you had to go through with him as a governor and you as a finance minister?
Ministers of finance are always the least popular amongst their colleagues. And there were always issues. There were issues as the Minister of Labour, there were issues as the governor. They were always there. But the one thing I knew about Tito is that you would try and deal with the issues, resolve them and move on. There was never any rancor, never a heavy heart in the way in which you dealt with issues. And that's what made friendship with him even more important than comradeship. It was just the way in which Tito lived and related. And that is why across the political spectrum, everybody still celebrates the contribution of Tito Mboweni. It's a great life. You know, but there were also other times. I mean, I've reflected on when times were tough for me, when I had to lead the process of Kia. He didn't ever let me feel that it was me. It was something we had to do together. And when we got to Mahikeng in December of 1997, he led the crafting of perhaps the most remarkable resolution that brought the RDP and GEAR together, but also spoke about what economics ought to mean in the lives of people. Tito was a great friend, a great ally, and just somebody wonderful to be around.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trevor Manuel. I am just going to try and also steal Ms. Maria Ramos and just speak to her on her friendship with Tito Mboweni. We are just going to move in here, Blaine. We are just going to quickly go to her, as we were going to try and speak to her earlier on. I know at this point in time Ms. Ramos, sorry to steal you at this particular point. You wrote a very eloquent piece on Tito Mboweni and your friendship with him. Just a summation of it for our viewers.
Well, Tito was a friend of many, many, many years. And as I said in the piece, first I'm going to miss him. But I think what we need to do is to make sure we both honor his contribution to our country, which is very long, very meaningful, covers a number of very important sectors. His contribution going all the way back to the formation and the development of the ANC's economic policy, but also labor policy, labor legislation, as Governor of the Central Bank, of the South African Reserve Bank, and in business, where Tito made a huge impact too. But more than anything else, I think for me personally, Tito was a friend with a caring, respectful, loving friendship that spanned many decades. And Trevor and I and our families are going to miss him. I don't think we should also lose sight of the fact that Tito was a great internationalist, he was a great African, and fundamentally he was somebody who believed that democracy was the thing we had needed to continue to fight for. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. That was Maria Ramos, a friend of Tito Mboweni, who says that he was part and parcel of the crafting of the ANC's economic policies that crafted South Africa's economic trajectory, that he played a pivotal role not only within the government space but also the business space. He was an internationalist. You remember how we had just spoken to the spokesperson of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, who spoke highly about Tito's contributions, particularly after that summit of African heads of state here in South Africa, when they spoke about the change that needs to be enforced through the African Union on some of the monetary fiscal policies of the African continent. You look at how South Africa from 2018 has tried to roll out and implement the Africa Free Trade Area, and that just shows you the role that this particular revered struggle icon. You look at people who have converged here at Nkowankowa Stadium to remember the life and times of Tito Mboweni, to accompany him to his final resting place. His organization, the African National Congress, which in many respects represents the hopes, the aspirations, the dreams of many South Africans, many of them who are donning the colors of the black, green and gold, sitting on those particular stands, who see a better life for themselves in the hands of the ANC, that, in the words of the incumbent deputy president, in the former deputy president rather of the country, David Mabuza, said that it seems as if the ANC is getting worse day by day. You look at some of the questions Tito Mboweni asked of the former president of the ANC, the former president of the country, Jacob Zuma, on question, quote, "Is it personal or is it political? Why would you do this to the ANC, Comrade Zuma?" End of quote. That were the words of Tito Mboweni on X, particularly after the aftermath of the disastrous elections that the ANC had come from. You go to another one where he spoke about the economic freedom fighters, which is represented by its leader, Julius Silo Malema, here, when he said it is painful what has happened to the EFF, and that the EFF should not be erased off the political space after they were politically annihilated by the MK party in the province of KwaZulu-Natal Plain. The president of the Republic, Cyril Ramaphosa, he has arrived here at Nkowankowa Stadium. The remains of Tito Mboweni are currently being draped in the colors of the South African flag, which represents blood that was spilled red during the apartheid struggle, which Tito Mboweni was a part of, which green represents agrarian and hope there plain.
Your interview with Trevor Manuel reminds me of the context provided by former President Thabo Mbeki in an interview with Sophie Mokoena, where he was going through the need for, at that time, back in 1999, for the political head of Treasury to interact or have an understanding with the head of the Reserve Bank. Hence, Tito Mboweni was brought in 1998. At that time, the law was talking about you needed at least a year in terms of banking experience. Then he took over in 1999. It talks about that interaction of the understanding of the policy, of the fiscal policy, marrying with the monetary policy of the Reserve Bank.
And let's bring in Sophie Mokoena, particularly on that interview that you had with the former President Thabo Mbeki. We actually saw him arriving there a few minutes earlier. I'm particularly reminded about the significance that Tito also made to the ANC, coming in significantly before the 1994 elections. And he's being heralded today, even today, for those two policy documents, you know, that he did help develop. And of course, those were the Ready to Govern as well as the Reconstruction and Development Program. Just speak to us about, of course, the symbolism of that, you know, ANC flag being presented to the family and just the significance of Tito Mboweni to the ANC.
This was his life. This was his home. This was what he knew as a young person. This is what he sacrificed in terms of ensuring that that organization does survive, and it continued to function by going to Lesotho, by going to the United Kingdom, by going to Lusaka. But people don't know. You know, you talk of Tito, maybe when you see him at crafting of policies and all of that. He was actually a deployee of Free State after 1994, as an ANC deployee, where you get responsibility to work with the party at the provincial level. So he used to drive himself to Free State. I knew because he would pass Frankfurt, going to Bethlehem, to the meetings. So ANC has been his home, his friend, and everything. And him playing that role, as Mbeki pointed out, was quite critical, and that's what he would have wanted to do. And but when you look at what's happening now, as Samkelo pointed out, very aggrieved in terms of the situation within the party. Perhaps let's take a listen at what Mbeki had to say about Tito. What role could Tito have played during this critical time where ANC is facing challenges? Let's take a listen. And I think Mzwai will know better.
Emily, we were shocked with the news that he's passed on, because we knew him as someone who was healthy. His sickness was so sudden, and you see, if somebody has been sick for a long, as a family, you expect anything and prepare yourself. But in this instance, it was not like that. It happened so sudden.
I'm emotional. And like I'm emotional, and I have questions, and I wish, I wish you were still here, you know.
The ANC is facing new challenges arising out of the outcome of the last general election. It's the first time that the ANC loses that capacity to govern the country, and therefore it has to deal with the consequences of that. That is part of the reason it was so sad that we lost Tito. Because you needed people like Tito, you needed Tito himself in the processes in the ANC to answer the questions about how do we deal with this new situation. You know, in our foundation, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, we've got two senior committees. There's a board of trustees and the council of advisors.
Yeah, look, Mzwai, the relationship that Tito Mboweni had with an Mbeki who said he met him in Lusaka, Zambia, remembers him coming there to Lusaka, Zambia, after studying in Lesotho and East Anglia, and he was already an economist, right, by the time he met him. And he was tasked by the ANC to kind of figure out how to deal with the South African economy post-liberation. How did his role within the party change over the years?
Well, in fact, it was actually very interesting because you remember both of them, the former president and the former governor or former minister, are actually economists because they actually, I think they have masters in economics, I think both of them. So you can already see in terms of what they wanted to achieve, so they would really be able to align. They would really be able to align. And I think it's no wonder why then Tito Mboweni was then forwarded to the Reserve Bank. And I mean, at the great advice of someone like Thabo Mbeki, who really was very instrumental, remember, around what was happening in the economic crafting of South Africa's outlook. So, you know, some people, you know, there are people who are able to study the mannerisms.
Yes.
I mean, because we have been following this, I mean, Sophie would attest to this. Look at the mannerism of Tito Mboweni and the mannerism of former President Thabo Mbeki. So it's more or less the same. You can tell that they come from the same school of thought. And then in terms of the direction of the country, so they knew exactly where they wanted to take it. And I mean, let's be honest, between those years, the country's economy was doing well. Of course, there were issues structurally that the economy may have been growing, but there were still challenges in terms of creating employment. But in terms of putting the fundamentals in place, I mean, there's no question about it. No wonder why the president, when there was a crisis, he just called on him.